Hi, it's Brad here with MDamon Technologies. Today I'm going to give you a quick high-level overview of Security Gateway and the features that will be available to you as a global administrator, as well as features available to domain administrators and features available for end users as well. So on my screen here, I'm actually logged into Security Gateway as 3 separate users so that I can give you a good comparison of the different levels of access. So this window that I'm showing here, I'm logged in as a global administrator. And then in this window, I'm logged in as a domain administrator. And then in this window, I'm logged in as an end user. Notice end users have far fewer options available to them. So for example, under the Global Administrator, you will have access to all of the settings in Security Gateway for all domains and users. Under the Domain Admin access type, you'll have access to most of the administrative settings, but specific to your domain. So we'll go over this in a little bit more detail here. So first of all, just to give you an idea of the interface, this is the dashboard. Again, we're logged in as a global administrator here, so you have access to your traffic charts, mailbox charts, and so forth. Under the Setup Users menu, this is where you can go to configure a variety of things, such as setting up accounts and setting up domains, setting up user verification sources, configuring automatic domain creation, and so forth. Also adding mail servers that you will be protecting with Security Gateway, configuring archiving and quarantine settings, and so forth. So, for example, under domains and users, I have 2 domains here, and I can add another domain by simply clicking on the new button and adding the information here. Each domain has a link on the right-hand side to the users who are assigned to that domain. So I can click on this link right here, for example, and then I can see all of the users assigned to that particular domain. I can click on the new button here if I want to create a new user, as well as configure various settings for that particular user, give that user a password, or assign that user administrative rights, and so forth. Now, Security Gateway can verify users against a user verification source, such as an Active Directory environment, an MDamon mail server, an LDAP server, and so forth. So if an email message arrives for an otherwise unknown user, you can add a user verification source here, and then Security Gateway will query that verification source to see if the account exists, and if it does, then the account will be created in Security Gateway. So this allows Security Gateway to automatically create users, but using the automatic domain creation feature, Security Gateway can also create domains automatically by querying that same user verification source. Now, under the mail configuration section, Security Gateway can be configured to filter mail for multiple mail servers, and then this is where you'll go to add those mail servers. Under domain mail servers, you can simply click on the new button here, put in a description, the host name or IP address of the mail server, the port that it's listening on for SMTP traffic, and other parameters as well. You can set this mail server as a default mail server. So in other words, if mail arrives or is sent from a domain that does not have a mail server assigned to it, then the default mail server will be used. Otherwise, you can assign specific domains that will be using this particular mail server. Under the quarantine configuration here, you can decide as the global administrator what to do with messages that were considered messages that are quarantined. You can hold them on the server, or you can allow the mail server or client to filter them and then optionally tag the message subject with a series of characters. So if you quarantine the messages on the server and have them held on the Security Gateway server, you can then configure these options down here to send users a quarantine summary email listing the contents of their quarantine folder. I have an example of that for you here, actually. So this email right here is the quarantine summary report that is sent out to each end user. That end user then has the ability to review these messages and then decide what to do with it. Release it from the quarantine, whitelist the sender, or mark it as spam or blacklist the sender. So this is the user quarantine. Administrators have a quarantine report email as well. This is what that looks like. So as the administrator, if messages were captured by data leak prevention or something that requires administrative review, you as the administrator will be able to go in and review those messages via the administrative quarantine summary email, and then release them accordingly as shown here. So those are the quarantine settings in Security Gateway. There's also archiving, and you can configure it here by simply checking this box to enable archiving, and then configure your archive stores, and you can also search your archived messages. There's an advanced search as well, so you can find archived messages pretty easily. Under the Systems section, if you have say for example a rather high traffic server and you'd like to improve performance, you can offload certain features and functions to different directories. So for example, if you have a different physical hard drive and you want to map a drive letter to it, then you can offload, for example, your logs to that directory, or your backups, your spam, Bayesian learning spam and non-spam folders, and so forth. So you can use that to help improve performance. There's also a useful versatile content filter that you can access via the security menu here. If you go to filtering and then message content, you can create a multiple content filter rules based on a variety of criteria, and you can assign them. For example, if you are the global administrator, you can assign them on a per domain basis. Now, if you are a domain administrator, you will only have access to create filters for your specific domain. So with the content filter, you can simply give it a name, and then you can add conditions for your rule based on who it's from, who it's to, the content, subject, body, and so forth. So if the body contains or does not contain certain characters, and you can add multiple conditions for each content filter rule. And then under the action section, you can decide what to do with that message, such as discard the message, quarantine it, redirect it, or if you select send as registered mail, you can then select the RMail encryption, track and prove, and e-sign options as well. So a useful content filter that you can configure in a variety of different ways. There's also attachment filtering here. So with this, you can filter out attachments by type. You can manually enter in the file extension. So, for example, executables or whatever you'd like to add here. If you use the links below, then you can block all attachments of a particular type. So all image files, for example, and that way it will populate all of those different file extensions pertaining, say, for example, to image files without you having to manually enter each one. And these will be blocked altogether. You can also choose which types of attachments you would like to quarantine as well. So the same concepts apply. And you can configure exclusions at the bottom for messages from whitelisted senders, authenticated sessions, and so forth. So these are all features that all global administrators will have access to, and then domain administrators will have access to them if they pertain to their specific assigned domain. So as a global administrator, I can go in here and I can create a new domain. If I go back under set up users, accounts, domains, and users, then we'll set up a new domain. I'm going to just call this domain2.com, and you can assign other parameters if you'd like to do so, passwords and so forth. You can determine how accounts for this domain will be verified, and decide which mail servers this domain will be using, and then assign administrators to that domain as well. But the minimum that you'll need to do is to simply enter in the domain name and click on Save and Close. And then from here, we can click on the number of users, and then we can actually add a user to this domain manually here. So if I said, for example, user.2 or something like that at domain2.com, you can then enter other information accordingly, real name, password if there's a password. You can optionally assign administrative rights to this particular user. If you want them to be a domain administrator, select the appropriate domain in the menu at the bottom and then move it over to the right hand column, and then click on Save and Close. So that's how you add users. Now, as a domain administrator, again, I'm logged in as a domain administrator over here in this window. The domain administrator has access to most of the same features that the global administrator does, with a few exceptions, but only for that particular user's assigned domain. So there are some things a domain administrator does not have access to, and we can kind of compare to see the difference. So on the left-hand side here, for example, as a global administrator, you'll have access to Civ scripts. You do not have access to the high-level Civ scripts as a domain administrator, but you do have access to everything else that you see here. So there are a few differences between the types of information you can access as a domain administrator. But a domain administrator can then go in to set up users and go to the accounts for their assigned domain to add users accordingly. They cannot go in here and add a new domain. That's available to the global administrator only. So, and also as far as reporting, global and domain administrators have access to a variety of different reports. Now, for a global administrator, these reports will be for all domains, and you will have the option to select additional domains in the drop-down menu. For domain administrators, these charts and reports will show data for your specific domain only, and so that includes a breakdown of junk email, messages processed inbound and outbound, top recipients, and so forth. So this is all on a per domain basis. So for archiving, the global administrator can configure archiving for all domains. And as you can see here, there's a drop-down menu at the top right-hand corner for a global administrator to select the appropriate domain and then configure archiving accordingly. Now, for a domain administrator, which is this window I have here, you can still configure archiving, but you have a couple of choices. You can choose to use the globally defined default settings for your domain, or you can use custom settings by selecting this option. And again, notice in the drop-down menu, you only have access to your own domain. When you use the custom settings, then you can check this box to enable archiving for your domain, configure archive stores, and can search archived messages and so forth. So those are the archiving features you have available as a domain administrator. Also for your security settings, again, these settings here are all domain specific, but you do have options for many of these screens to use the globally defined settings or to use your own custom settings for your assigned domain. And also with logs and reports, again, you'll have access to the message logs and the reports for your specific domain. Now for the end user, so an end user does not have access to any of those administrative settings. They only have access to what you allow them access to. So end users will have access to settings for their specific account, their landing page, their quarantine settings, whitelist and blacklist. Now you as an administrator can choose whether or not to allow users to have access to these settings. So this feature may or may not be visible to the end user depending on how the administrator configures the appropriate access rights. End users can also view their own quarantine. They can view the message log for their account for inbound and outbound mail, and then determine what happened with the message. Was it rejected? Was it delivered? And so forth. And they can also search their own message archive if you grant them access to do so. So that's the basic high-level summary of the different varieties of access for global domain administrators and for end users.